Tom Jones by Henry Fielding. Book Summary. Henry Fielding's The History of Tom Jones, a Foundling 1749 is both a sprawling comic epic and a moral satire of 18th-century English society. The novel follows the life of a foundling, Tom Jones, from infancy to adulthood, tracing his struggles for legitimacy, love, and virtue in a world riddled with hypocrisy. It is divided into 18 books, a structure that allows Fielding to blend adventure, romance, and social commentary with philosophical musings on human nature. The beginning, the foundling at Paradise Hall. The story opens in Somersetshire, at the country estate of Squire Allworthy, a man of great virtue and benevolence. Returning home from London, Allworthy discovers a baby boy lying in his bed. The infant, abandoned but healthy, is immediately taken as a symbol of providence. Fielding introduces this moment with irony and compassion, establishing the tension between human frailty and divine order that threads through the novel. Determined to discover the parents, Allworthy calls upon the local magistrates and servants. Investigation reveals that the baby is the illegitimate child of Jenny Jones, a maidservant in the village. She confesses that the father is her tutor, the schoolmaster Mr. Partridge. Allworthy, though scandalized, tempers justice with mercy. He banishes Jenny from the parish but refuses to prosecute her. Partridge, disgraced and impoverished, leaves the county voluntarily. The foundling is christened Tom Jones, and Allworthy decides to raise him as his own ward. This decision, noble as it is, scandalizes the county. The moralists of Somersetshire gossip about Allworthy's indulgence, seeing it as encouragement of vice. Yet Allworthy, embodying the rational benevolence of the Enlightenment, persists. A rival is born, Captain Blifil, and the heir. Soon after, Allworthy's unmarried sister Bridget Allworthy marries Captain Blifil, a smooth and self-righteous officer who visits the estate. They have a son, Master Blifil, who becomes Tom's foster brother. Captain Blifil's outward piety masks a covetous heart. He envies the affection that Allworthy shows Tom. Ironically, while meditating on his future wealth and plotting to secure his son's inheritance, Captain Blifil is struck down by apoplexy and dies, an early instance of Fielding's comic justice. The stage is set for a lifelong contrast: the spirited, generous Tom versus the coldly sanctimonious Blifil. Both are reared under Allworthy's roof, but their treatment differs markedly. Tom's good nature leads him into mischief. He steals apples and rabbits not for pleasure but to feed the starving family of Black George, one of Allworthy's gamekeepers. In contrast, Blifil, outwardly pious, is inwardly deceitful. The two boys are educated by Mr. Thwackum, a brutish clergyman who equates religion with punishment, and Mr. Square, a philosopher obsessed with abstract virtue. Both tutors favor Blifil's hypocrisy over Tom's instinctive kindness. Early love and scandal. Tom's impulsive generosity wins him the affection of common folk but the suspicion of the gentry. He grows into a handsome, athletic youth admired for his courage and warmth. His frequent visits to Squire Western, Allworthy's boisterous neighbor, deepen his acquaintance with Sophia Western, the squire's intelligent and compassionate daughter. Yet at this stage, Tom's heart belongs to Molly Seagrim, the spirited daughter of Black George. Molly's pregnancy brings scandal to the parish. True to his nature, Tom accepts responsibility and shields her from disgrace, declaring himself the father of her child. The revelation shocks Allworthy but also wins him reluctant admiration for Tom's honesty. However, Tom's loyalty to Molly begins to wane as he discovers her infidelity. She has been sleeping with other men, including Squire and a gamekeeper. The exposure frees Tom emotionally, and he begins to realize his deep, unspoken love for Sophia. The illness of Allworthy and the fall of Tom. Allworthy falls gravely ill, and the entire household gathers around him, expecting his death. In a touching scene, he reads his will, leaving the bulk of his estate to Blifil, though Tom is also provided for. Square and Thwackum grumble about being left only modest legacies. During this period, Tom's devotion stands out. He keeps vigil by Allworthy's bedside, refusing rest or comfort. When Allworthy miraculously recovers, the atmosphere of relief turns chaotic. Tom, in his exuberance, gets drunk, which Blifil interprets as wickedness. Round the same time, the sudden death of Bridget Allworthy shocks the household. A lawyer named Mr. Dowling appears, hinting at secret matters related to Bridget's estate. Blifil seizes the opportunity to slander Tom, accusing him of licentiousness and ingratitude. Tom's impulsive temper betrays him after Blifil taunts him as a bastard. Tom strikes him. Allworthy, misled by Blifil's calm deceit, banishes Tom from Paradise Hall, believing him corrupt beyond redemption. The expulsion marks the first of Tom's moral exiles, outwardly from the estate, inwardly from innocence. Sophia's struggle for autonomy. Meanwhile, Sophia Western faces her own trials. Her aunt, Mrs. Western, a fashionable and domineering woman, wishes to marry her off to Blifil, seeing it as a socially advantageous match. Sophia detests Blifil's hypocrisy and declares she will never marry without affection. Her father, the rough but well-meaning Squire Western, alternates between rage and affection, embodying both patriarchal tyranny and rustic simplicity. He threatens to disinherit her unless she obeys. Sophia's heart, however, belongs to Tom, whose goodness she perceives beneath his faults. Fielding paints their love as natural and spontaneous, unlike the artificial courtships around them. Yet, just as their affection begins to blossom, Tom's expulsion destroys her peace. When she learns of his involvement with Molly and later Mrs. Waters, she suffers, but remains loyal in spirit. Mrs. Western's schemes only intensify Sophia's resolve to choose love over property. Tom's adventures on the road. Now a wanderer, Tom embarks on a journey through the English countryside, a symbolic pilgrimage through vice, virtue, and self-discovery. Along the way, he encounters a variety of characters that reflect the moral landscape of 18th-century England: highwaymen, soldiers, beggars, and innkeepers, all rendered in Fielding's vivid comic realism. In Bristol, Tom meets the disgraced Mr. Partridge, who insists he was falsely accused of fathering Tom. Grateful for Tom's generosity, Partridge becomes his loyal if foolish companion. Their relationship mirrors that of Don Quixote and Sancho Panza, Tom idealistic but impulsive, Partridge talkative and credulous. Soon after, Tom rescues Mrs. Waters from a highway robbery. She is beautiful, lively, and grateful to grateful. In fact, they begin an affair at the Upton Inn, one of the novel's most farcical episodes. Unknown to Tom, Mrs. Waters is actually Jenny Jones, his supposed mother, though neither recognizes the other at the time. The scene becomes more tangled when Sophia, fleeing her father's estate to avoid marrying Blifil, arrives at the same inn. She discovers Tom in Mrs. Waters' bed and, heartbroken, leaves behind her muff of fur and warmer as a silent token of her presence. When Tom later finds it, his conscience is tormented, and he resolves to pursue her to London. Adding to the chaos, Mr. Fitzpatrick, an Irishman, and the jealous husband of Mrs. Waters, arrives at the inn, as does Squire Western, in hot pursuit of Sophia. The overlapping arrivals produce a series of comic misunderstandings, a hallmark of Fielding's dramatic design. London, the theatre of corruption. Sophia travels to London accompanied by her cousin Harriet Fitzpatrick, who herself is fleeing her violent husband. In London, Sophia takes refuge with her worldly relative, Lady Bellaston, a wealthy woman whose life revolves around gossip and intrigue. Lady Bellaston outwardly supports Sophia but secretly envies her beauty, and desires Tom for herself. When Tom and Partridge reach London, they lodge in the house of Mrs. Miller, a kind widow, and her daughters Nancy and Betsy. The house is also home to Mr. Nightingale, a young gentleman torn between love and social ambition. Tom becomes a mediator in their affair. When Nancy becomes pregnant, Tom persuades Nightingale to marry her, displaying both moral courage and genuine compassion. This subplot reflects Tom's growing maturity. He learns to act with principle rather than impulse. Meanwhile, Lady Bellaston seduces Tom, using her wealth and influence to entangle him in a degrading liaison. Fielding presents this not as mere lust but as a test of integrity. When Tom later falls out with Lady Bellaston, he ends the affair by sending her a feigned marriage proposal, a witty strategy that frightens her away, exposing her hypocrisy. Sophia, still under Lady Bellaston's roof, becomes the target of further schemes. Lady Bellaston encourages Lord Fellamar, a nobleman, to rape Sophia under the pretext of forced marriage. Fellamar's attempt fails, but the incident underscores the moral corruption of London society, where reputation and desire collide without conscience. Imprisonment and revelation. As the novel nears its climax, the major characters converge in London. Squire Western, Mrs. Western Blifil, and Allworthy arrive, each pursuing personal motives: property, marriage, or reconciliation. Western, in his rough way, still wants Sophia to marry Blifil, and when Sophia resists, he locks her in her room. Tom, meanwhile, is drawn into a duel with Mr. Fitzpatrick, who believes Tom has seduced his wife. In defending himself, Tom wounds Fitzpatrick and is arrested for attempted murder. His imprisonment marks his lowest point, both materially and morally, a mirror to his earlier expulsion from Allworthy's house. While in jail, Tom receives astonishing news from Partridge. Mrs. Waters, his former lover, is none other than Jenny Jones, the woman once accused of being his mother. She now seeks to clear his name. Mrs. Waters meets Allworthy and reveals that Fitzpatrick is still alive and has confessed to initiating the duel. She also reports that a lawyer, acting on behalf of an unnamed gentleman, tried to bribe her to testify falsely against Tom. Allworthy traces this conspiracy back to Blifil, whose hypocrisy finally stands exposed. In one of the novel's most significant reversals, Mrs. Waters further reveals that Tom's true mother was Bridget Allworthy, Allworthy's own sister. The foundling is thus Allworthy's nephew, not a bastard after all. This revelation transforms Tom's social position from illegitimate orphan to rightful heir. At the same time, Squire sends a letter to Allworthy admitting that he misjudged Tom's character, especially during the supposed scandal of Allworthy's illness. Tom's compassion, not his faults, marked his true worth. Fielding uses these revelations to reward sincerity and punish deceit, fulfilling the moral arc of the comic epic. Reconciliation and moral resolution. With his innocence restored, Tom is released from prison. The reunion between Tom and Allworthy is deeply emotional. The old man, humbled by guilt and joy, embraces Tom as both nephew and son. Tom, ever magnanimous, forgives Blifil and even arranges for him to receive a small annuity, demonstrating his capacity for mercy, a Christian virtue Fielding consistently prizes above rigid morality. Mrs. Miller, who has become Sophia's confidant, explains the truth behind Tom's supposed proposal to Lady Bellaston. Sophia, initially disillusioned, recognizes Tom's sincerity and forgives him. Yet she remains firm in her principles, insisting that fidelity and self-control are essential in marriage. Tom humbly accepts her rebuke, completing his moral education. He has learned to balance passion with prudence. Squire Western, now eager to secure his daughter's happiness, and pleased with Tom's new inheritance, blesses their union. In a final act of poetic justice, Fielding allows every character to receive their due. Blifil is disgraced but not destroyed, Thwackum and Square vanish into obscurity, and Partridge, ever loquacious, resumes teaching. Tom and Sophia marry and settle near Western's estate, raising two children. Their home becomes a haven of generosity and affection, echoing Allworthy's benevolent example. Fielding closes with a note of comic harmony. Virtue triumphs not because it is perfect, but because it is human. Themes and moral vision. 1. Nature versus hypocrisy. Tom's natural goodness, his instinctive empathy, honesty, and energy contrasts sharply with Blifil's calculated piety. Fielding argues that true virtue arises from the heart, not from outward conformity to moral codes. Tom sins, but his sins are rooted in warmth and excess, not malice. As Allworthy finally realizes, there is a principle of goodness which can never be eradicated. 2. The comic epic in prose. Fielding famously calls Tom Jones a comic epic in prose. The novel's grand structure, omniscient narrator, and episodic adventures mimic classical epics, but the focus shifts from heroes and gods to ordinary English life. Fielding's narrator frequently intrudes with ironic commentary, offering philosophical reflections on morality, love, and storytelling itself. These digressions, often witty and conversational, give the novel a modern, self-aware texture. 3. Women and autonomy. Sophia Western emerges as one of Fielding's most admirable heroines. Her virtue is not passive chastity but active reason. She defies patriarchal authority with dignity, refusing to marry without affection. In contrast, characters like Lady Bellaston represent the moral decay of high society, where love is transactional. Sophia's name, meaning wisdom, embodies the ideal of moral intelligence guiding emotion. 4. The journey and moral growth. Tom's literal journey from Somerset to London mirrors his spiritual development from impetuous youth to self-knowledge. Each encounter tests a moral dimension: compassion, honesty, fidelity. Fielding suggests that virtue is not innate perfection, but the result of experience, error, and repentance. 5. Society and satire. Through his vivid cast of characters, landed gentry, clergy, servants, and rogues, Fielding paints a panoramic portrait of 18th-century England. His satire exposes the hypocrisy of social rank, the greed of marriage markets, and the corruption of law and religion. Yet beneath the laughter lies a humane vision. Even folly can lead to wisdom if tempered by charity. Tom Jones is more than a story of a foundling's rise to fortune. It is a moral comedy of human nature. Fielding's genius lies in his balance of realism and idealism. He accepts human imperfection without cynicism. By the novel's end, every disguise is stripped away: Tom's parentage, Blifil's virtue, Sophia's restraint, and what remains is truth shaped by experience. The novel closes on a note of measured optimism. Love and integrity can survive in a flawed world, provided they are guided by self-knowledge and forgiveness. Fielding's blend of satire, sentiment, and structural mastery makes Tom Jones not only one of the first great English novels but also one of its most enduring studies of the heart as education, analysis, one of fiction's more irreverent and likable characters. The title character of Henry Fielding as Tom Jones has entertained readers and viewers of the multiple dramatic forms he later assumed for St. Uri's. What has become familiar to 21st-century readers proved an entirely new approach for those of the 18th, as Fielding wrote whole chapters to introduce each of the novel's 18 books. He used those introductions to explain the purpose of fiction and suggest for readers the way they might judge the narrative, touching on the moral purpose that Fielding's contemporaries believed literature should have. As Tom himself proves a most immoral protagonist, that Fielding could convince his readers proved a delightful feat. Fielding's readers recognized in Tom the 18th-century ideal of a natural goodness in man that could, with encouragement, be revealed even in the most mischievous human. He represents a prototype of the playboy hero that would appear in later fiction. Much of the novel's enduring success is due not only to Tom's likability as a flawed hero but to the shaping of the heroine Sophia Western free of stereotype, as well as of the detestable Blifil Tom's antagonist and a disreputable aristocrat that readers love to hate. The well-drawn characters and dramatic tension counter the sometimes contrived coincidence and mistaken identity on which much early drama and fiction turned, an inheritance from classic romance. As suggested by the novel's subtitle, Tom is literally found as an infant, discovered by the good and wealthy Mr. Allworthy, whose name is only one of several symbolic names in the story. He elects to raise Tom along with his nephew and heir, the detestable Blifil, already a spoiled, self-centered brat who lives to torture Tom with the help of their tutor, the aptly named Thwackum, and the so-called philosopher Mr. Square. While Tom prefers keeping company with common folk, including poachers on Mr. Allworthy's property, Blifil is too good to mingle with the ordinary man. The gamekeeper's daughter, Molly Seagram, likes Tom, but he loves Squire Western's daughter Sophia, who has already been pledged to Blifil. Sophia first feels affection for Tom when he attempts to help her with a bird, symbolic of Sophia herself, a creature Blifil simply wants to kill. She first voices that Tom possesses a noble character, assuring readers that nobility will triumph in the end. Tom can get into enough trouble on his own without being framed by Blifil, but the conflict between the two escalates until they become young men. Tom's first sign of honor occurs when Molly announces she is pregnant, and he agrees to take responsibility for his actions and marry her. He is freed of that commitment when he learns that she has slept with several men, and there is no way to know the identity of the father. However, Blifil ensures that Tom's reputation is ruined with Mr. Allworthy, who sorrowfully ejects him from his home. Tom plans to join the army and travels with a teacher companion named Partridge. Tom is surprised to encounter Sophia traveling with her maid, Mrs. Honor. She is fleeing to London to escape the arranged marriage with Blifil, a fact that thrills Tom. When he discovers her lost pocketbook, he vows to deliver it to her in London, but has several adventures along the way in the tradition of the classic romance. Each proves his honorable intentions, some of which are lost in mischief and the passion of the moment. He engages in a sexual affair in London with Lady Bellaston in return for her support. Sophia again enters the plot when Lady Bellaston plans a meeting for her with her friend Lord Fellamar, leading the horrified Sophia to discover Tom's illicit relationship with his mistress. All hope for establishing a relationship with Sophia seems lost, and after Tom's participation in a duel in which he believes he has killed his opponent, Bellaston and Fellamar have him arrested for murder. Although he spends a stint in prison, he has not actually killed anyone, and so is released. Despite Tom's best attempts, his actions continue to be misunderstood and misjudged. Even so, Sophia continues to pursue Tom, even when she understands he has taken yet another lover in Mrs. Waters. She leaves her hand muff on his bed with her name pinned to it, informing Tom of her continued interest. That Sophia remains on Tom's mind is evident when he refuses the attentions of yet another possible conquest, the widow Hunt, choosing to commune with the muff, and by extension Sophia instead. Tom's fortunes return when Mrs. Waters explains to Mr. Allworthy that Tom had rescued her from the hands of a villain. She testifies he is the worthiest of men. No young gentleman of his age is, I believe, freer from vice, and few have the 20th part of his virtues. Nay, whatever vices he hath had, I am firmly persuaded he hath now taken a resolution to abandon them. After being proclaimed a gentleman, Tom is proved one when Allworthy learns from Mr. Dowling that Blifil had hidden a letter intended for him that revealed Tom's true identity as the son of Allworthy, as Sister Bridget, and thus his nephew. Following this revelation, Blifil earns his just deserts. Tom becomes heir to Allworthy's fortune and recipient of his blessings, and he at last is worthy of Sophia, who is in love with him. All schools of criticism find much to study in Fielding's novel. Feminist critics are interested in Sophia's stance as the novel's moral center, and also in Fielding's sexual allusions, as in his vulgar implications in discussions of Sophia's muff and the control it exerts over Tom, one of several inferences in the novel that also interest psychoanalytic critics. New historicist critics find of interest Fielding's stance on issues of the day such as copyright and the definitions of history and truth as they pertain to writing. And formalists look to this early novel for development of narrative and unified plot. Modern readers enjoy Tom's rebellious personality and the fact that he is rewarded for his ultimate honesty. Although Fielding commented that the quality of one's inner being is worth little without actions that support it. Despite that statement, only when Tom is proved a member of the wealthy class does he earn his reward, a condition totally acceptable to readers of Fielding's age when fiction that featured the commoner as protagonist had not yet developed. Emergence of the realistic tradition, rise of the middle-class readership, realism as moral inquiry in Henry Fielding's Tom Jones. The 18th century heralded a new phase in English fiction, the rise of realism as a literary mode concerned with representing life truthfully and exploring moral experience through ordinary characters. This period also witnessed the growth of a middle-class reading public eager for narratives that reflected their values and social conditions. Among the writers who shaped this new form, Henry Fielding stands out as a major innovator. His novel The History of Tom Jones, a foundling 1749, exemplifies the realistic tradition through its vivid social panorama, psychological depth, and moral inquiry. Fielding's realism is not merely descriptive but ethical. He uses fiction to explore the nature of virtue, hypocrisy, and human imperfection within the everyday world of 18th century England. The emergence of the realistic tradition. The realistic tradition emerged in response to the artificiality of earlier romances and heroic tales. Rather than depicting idealized knights or sentimental heroines, Fielding presented ordinary men and women in plausible circumstances. Tom Jones opens in the country house of Squire Allworthy, where an infant is discovered in a bed. This domestic beginning, an infant wrapped up in a blanket, found in Mr. Allworthy's bed, immediately grounds the novel in familiar social reality rather than mythic adventure. The story then follows Tom's growth from childhood to maturity, tracing his experiences through both rural and urban settings. Fielding's realism is evident in his careful observation of social detail, from the gossip of servants like Mrs. Deborah Wilkins to the petty ambitions of characters such as Mrs. Western. Inns, taverns, roads, and London drawing rooms are depicted with comic precision. When Tom travels toward London, for instance, he passes through a series of vividly described inns that reveal the manners, speech, and moral pretensions of every social rank. Fielding's eye for everyday behavior, drunken quarrels, gossip, charity, and deceit transforms common life into moral drama. Moreover, Fielding insisted on plausibility and moral probability in narrative construction. Unlike the sensational adventures of earlier prose, the events in Tom Jones arise from recognizable motives: jealousy, love, greed, and ambition. His characters, as he claimed in the preface to Joseph Andrews, are drawn from the source of all characters, the human heart. Thus, his realism lies not merely in surface detail, but in the psychological truth of human behavior. The rise of the middle-class readership. The realistic novel developed alongside a new class of readers, the literate and socially mobile middle class. These readers sought entertainment that also reflected their moral aspiration and social anxieties. Fielding's narrative style, balancing humor with moral reflection, appealed directly to this audience. In Tom Jones, the middle-class values of virtue, sincerity, and rational morality are constantly tested. Squire Allworthy, the benevolent but credulous patriarch, embodies the moral ideals of this class: charity, reason, and a belief in innate goodness. His estate represents the stable moral order that readers admired, even as the plot dramatizes how easily such order can be disrupted by hypocrisy and deceit. Characters like Blifil, Allworthy's nephew, personify the false virtue that Fielding warns against. Outwardly pious and deferential, Blifil manipulates others for selfish gain, precisely the sort of moral duplicity Fielding's middle-class readers were anxious to recognize and reject in their own socha. Elworld, the narrator's moral commentary, also reflects Fielding's engagement with this audience. He addresses readers directly as rational participants in moral debate. I describe not men by manners, not an individual, but a species. This insistence on moral generalization, turning individual folly into a universal lesson, made his fiction both instructive and accessible to a readership that valued moral instruction alongside entertainment. Realism as moral inquiry. In Tom Jones, Fielding's realism serves a deeper function than mere lifelike depiction. It is a means of moral inquiry. Tom Jones explores virtue not as abstract principle but as lived experience tested through temptation, misunderstanding, and forgiveness. The protagonist, Tom, is a foundling of uncertain birth who grows up kind-hearted but impulsive. His moral education unfolds through a series of realistic encounters. When he helps the beggar Black George despite being punished for it, Tom demonstrates instinctive generosity, a virtue of the heart rather than the head. Yet his later sexual missteps with Molly Seagram and Mrs. Waters expose his moral weakness. Fielding uses these episodes not to condemn Tom as immoral but to illustrate the complexity of human virtue, which includes error, growth, and self-knowledge. Contrastingly, Blifil, who never errs, outwardly embodies cold, self-righteous virtue. Fielding's realism exposes that true morality lies in sincerity and good intention, not mere propriety. When Allworthy finally learns of Blifil's deceit, the revelation underscores the novel's moral argument: hypocrisy is more corrupt than honest passion. Fielding's narrator reinforces this inquiry by directly engaging readers' moral judgment. After Tom's fight with Mr. Thwackum, the narrator remarks that the boy's faults were rather the excesses of a noble disposition. Such commentary invites readers to weigh actions contextually, acknowledging moral shades rather than absolutes. Even the novel's comic elements serve moral ends. The body scene at Upton Inn, where Tom and Mrs. Waters are discovered in a compromising position, is written with humor but also irony. It tests both the character's self-restraint and the reader's moral sympathy, illustrating how virtue operates within the messiness of real life, not in idealized chastity, but in the struggle for self-control and forgiveness. Fielding's narrative technique and moral vision. Fielding's omniscient narrator functions as both storyteller and moral philosopher. Each of the novel's 18 books begins with a prefatory essay, part moral reflection, part literary theory. These digressions transform the novel into a dialogue between author and reader about the moral purpose of fiction itself. For instance, in Book I, Fielding likens himself to the master of a feast, serving up moral and comic nourishment in equal measure. Such self-awareness makes Tom Jones a novel about reading ethically. To enjoy the story is also to examine one's own moral judgment. His comic tone is equally crucial. Through humor, Fielding humanizes moral imperfection. The marriage of Tom and Sophia Western at the end does not reward perfection, but reconcile humanity. Sophia, whose name means wisdom, represents moral clarity. Tom, through suffering and repentance, learns to value constancy over passion. Their union symbolizes a moral harmony grounded in self-knowledge, a realistic conclusion rather than a fairy tale ending.